Well, I would love to welcome everybody to the College of Public Health and a seminar series that has been running for the last few years, once a semester on trauma-informed care. I want to thank Dr. David Sarwar for his openness and welcoming us to use this weekly space for our once a semester seminars. And I want to welcome you all today for joining us amidst the crazy life that is this pandemic new normal. Joining on a Friday afternoon for some new learning is really a big feat in and of itself. So with that, my name is Amy Lynch. I'm an occupational therapy faculty member in the College of Public Health and the Department of Health and Rehabilitation Services. And I represent a group of faculty and staff from across the university who are passionate about trauma and increasing awareness of trauma-informed care in all sectors of living. So I want to thank all of the people who are behind me on this, and I want to welcome Susan Brotherton. Susan was the former director of Philadelphia Social Service Ministries of the Salvation Army of Greater Philadelphia. Susan has led emergency, transitional, permanent, supportive, and low-income senior housing programs, comprehensive victim-centered anti-human trafficking services, and has also done intensive case management services. She has represented the Salvation Army teaching promising practices in trauma-informed care, creating trauma-sensitive healing spaces, and meeting the needs of families and youth experiencing homelessness, and understanding the unique needs of survivors of commercial sexual exploitation. Susan is an adjunct professor in Temple University's social work program in the School of Public Health. She is instructing both BSW and MSW students. She also provides trainings for anti-human trafficking organizations, facilitating the creation of safe, trauma-sensitive cultures. Prior to her work with Salvation Army, she worked in the behavioral health field where she managed a residential program for adults whose lives have been affected by mental illness as a case manager and a psychotherapist. It's my pleasure to welcome Susan Brotherton. In the world that we are living in right now, Susan, would you say there's not a single organization that shouldn't be considering, right? Everybody should be considering a trauma-informed lens in their everyday life, regardless what industry and sector they're working in.
True, because we have just been sort of slapped in the face with the impact of trauma as we've all been surviving this pandemic and everything that's happened in our world over the past couple of years. So thank you. Thanks a lot, Amy. And it's nice to be here. I appreciate all of you showing up today particularly on a Friday afternoon. Those are always my paperwork time. So listening is really a wonderful thing. Thanks so much. So today we're really going to take a look at the nature of trauma and the impact of parallel process on organizational structures. We're going to look at the values of trauma-informed care and how to bring those into policies with the overarching goal of creating some healing spaces for those we serve, our coworkers, and our stakeholders. Then the second half will be applying these values to organizational processes from hiring through termination to really look at how policies can support staff and help us to really do our very, very best to serve vulnerable populations. Plan for today, we'll start to look at understanding trauma and the impact of trauma on organizations, the values of trauma-informed care from SAMHSA and the sanctuary model, which I have worked under for many years. I'm going to show a brief video about, as we start to take a look at organizational culture and how we can sort of shape our culture to be more trauma-informed. We'll go through some organizational processes and talk a little bit about the impact of trauma-informed organizations. I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions and answers, but if you need some clarification throughout, please just jump in and ask a question. If it seems too large for me to address at the minute, I'd be happy then to add it to questions at the end. So a good definition of trauma-informed care is the best place to start when we start to talk about organizations. And I really, really like this one. This is from SAMHSA. This is right off their website. pointing out that trauma-informed services assume that people are doing the very best they can at any given time to cope with the life-altering and frequently catastrophic effects of trauma. And that's the one main thing that I think we really need to hold on to when people are struggling, that they are absolutely giving us their best. And when we can hold on to that, then we can start to shape programming that can really help support people. Move you out of the way here. So historically, social workers have been providing trauma-informed care. When we work with clients on a one-to-one basis, there's been a general understanding, right, of how we understand the impact and then the prevalence of early adversity in the lives of those that we serve. We pretty much look at problems as symptoms of maladaptive coping. We understand that trauma really does shape the way people view the world, themselves, and their place in it. We know that it can impact people's psychosocial functioning. So we have an understanding on how we can do this on a one-to-one basis. But then the bigger question is, how does that impact organizations? So I want to take a minute and kind of share with you my history and kind of understanding the importance of trauma-informed care. I started working at the Salvation Army's Red Shield family residence back in the early 90s. I had just recently finished my MSW here at Temple, and I got a part-time job working at the Red Shield. It's just down the street from the main campus of Temple, same side of the road, houses 41 families. Families stay till they secure housing, and they absolutely stay full and at capacity. So it houses about 120 people in total is the capacity of the program. But when I first started, I came on to provide some support services for those who are recovering. If any of you are as old as I am, you'll sort of remember how that the crack epidemic just impacted families in Philadelphia. And when I came on to the Red Shield, I think 80 to 90% of the parents and guardians in these families were there because they were being threatened by DHS that either they get off the streets and into housing with their families, or they might lose custody of their children. So the folks were really motivated, and people wanted to get clean. Nobody wanted to live that kind of life. But the ferocity, boy, of that crack cocaine really made it very challenging for families. But what was interesting at the time, even though we had the struggles of helping people to manage their recovery, is that we had a good sense of community. We knew, and everybody wanted to keep all that street behavior and the drugs and all that stuff outside of the building and maintain a safe place for the moms and dads and their kids to kind of recover, get back on track, and secure housing. Now, back then, almost everyone got Section 8 housing when they left, which really helped people to really achieve some stability. There aren't the same kinds of housing options right now, but back then there really were. So we were kind of chugging along very nicely, meeting people's needs. I had gotten promoted to be the director of the Red Shield, and then things started to change. Now, mind you, I stayed there about 18 years, but well into, I guess, the early, actually a few years later, we started to see young women coming in seeking shelter, many of whom we had known as kids when they came in with their parents. But it was a very different feeling. Young people were coming in really angry, very hostile, cursing staff out in a hot second. And it was very different than what we were accustomed to. Now, these were not folks that were managing any kind of addiction at all. These are the kids that kind of grew up in and out of crack houses, in and out of group homes, in and out of families' custody. So what we were really seeing were these trauma responses. But back then, we didn't really know what it was. So what we did as leadership in the Red Shield is we started to put in more and more rules. We thought, we need more structure. We have to start to control this kind of angry behavior that's coming in, because staff are being threatened. We weren't as comfortable as having interns because we felt that it wasn't that safe. Staff kept their doors closed. They weren't really out and engaging with our whole population. So we thought we need more rules. We need more structures. But then what we learned is the tighter we made things, the more distance we put between ourselves and those that we were serving. our structures ended up kind of forcing people to be discharged. And back then in emergency housing, if you were discharged for any kind of violence, you could be put out of the system for 120 days. So we were in the business of housing people, not making them homeless and even more desperate because they couldn't get any kinds of services at all. So we really knew we needed to do something different. So what we were seeing here is this notion of this slippery slope, right? We started to use these tighter restrictions to control behavior. We started making decisions more out of fear, like how do we protect ourselves? How do we stop the violence that just kept sort of breaking out amongst folks who were staying in the program? When you function out of fear, you're not really thinking creatively. You're not generating creative solutions to very difficult problems. That made our population kind of respond a little bit more negatively. They were quicker to violence, quicker to curse out staff. So we weren't really meeting the needs at all of what we were trying to do. The impact on the staff was awful. They felt much less satisfied having to go and listen to all kinds of names that aren't your own being called at you day in and day out is really very hard. So we ended up with this atmosphere of fear and unresolved grief because this wasn't really the kind of work that we wanted to be doing. That's not why you provide emergency housing. So we had the opportunity to, actually, we started to research what we were seeing because we really didn't understand. And this was like in the early 90s. And we found, came across Sandy Bloom, who was just starting to do a lot more of her like family institutes around the city, had done a lot of research on trauma. I don't think she had published maybe her first book, but she met us just at the old trolley car diner, if anybody knows that, out in like Germantown, Mount Airy, or Chestnut Hill area. And we started to talk about what was happening in our program. And for us, we were really blown away by this, but she said, this is what trauma is. And she started to explain to us what trauma was really about. And at the heart of what we were seeing then is this notion of organizational parallel process, right? We talk a lot about parallel process when we work with clients individually, but if we think about this on a much larger scale, right? And this is Sandy's definition, it's parallel process has been defined as what happens when two or more systems, whether like individuals, groups, or organizations like we're talking about, have these significant relationships with one another, and they tend to develop this similar affect, similar thoughts, and similar actions. And this is kind of defined as parallel process. So when we work with clients like in a therapeutic process, we shape the parallel process in a particular way, much like we wish to do with organizations. But what we were finding is that the systems can really inadvertently, but can recapitulate the very experiences that have been so toxic for those that we wanted to help. So for the few staff and I that had met with Sandy, these giant light bulbs appeared over our heads like, oh, we finally get this. This makes sense. But now what is it that we need to do about that? So does that make some sense to people about how this can become so toxic? Another example of this notion of kind of a toxic parallel process also comes from the work that I've done with human trafficking. Years ago, we worked with the family courts. There was a particular judge who would pull cases for youth that seemed to have some sort of human trafficking component to them. There were some red flags for trafficking, and she dealt with those cases very differently from a beautifully trauma-informed way. But what we started to see is that through the judicial system, that they would sort of get a hold on these women and then start to mandate the treatment for substance abuse or remanding children to group homes. And in many ways, what we started to see was from the youth is it kind of reminded them of the parallel process of the pimp, right? They would do everything they could to get out of this court mandated system, much like they would perform for the pimp. So there was no real learning that was actually happening. They just continued in that same sort of process with those that were in power, which is not the way we really want to do work, right? We want people to engage in treatment and to do things because it will make a positive change in their life. So back to the emergency housing program and Sandy. So what we're looking at are like self-organizing systems. Our emergency housing program was self-organizing. Now you self-organize every day, right? You knew how to get on to Zoom, you knew how to sign on, what time, what you needed to do all of that. And in all of your daily activities and your professional activities, you kind of self-organize. But organizations can also self-organize. And what Sandy often says, it's, they can do that for free because it comes for free. It's not really that great of a gift because we can become trauma organized systems. And that's what we had become. So what she means by that is that when a system becomes fundamentally organized around the impact of chronic and toxic stress, even when that undermines our mission. So that was really where we found ourselves, and we started to work with Sandy, who talked to us, and we took on Sandy's sanctuary model, and I'm going to go through a little bit more of that. But in essence, what she was suggesting is that we come up with a new operating system, right? If our current operating system is not working so well and we have become trauma organized, we need to put into place a different operating system. And for us, that was then sanctuary. So I will go into more of the details as we kind of talk a little bit more about what it means to kind of change the organizational culture and put in a very different operating system. This is a chart by Temple's own Cheryl Hyde, who teaches in the social work, in the School of Social Work, and writes a lot about organizations and organizational culture. And as we look at organizational culture, she breaks that down into some three main areas. One is sort of these basic assumptions and organizations' deeply held beliefs. She looks at the values of how things ought to be. What are the organizational values? And then she has a third realm in organizational culture, which she refers to as artifacts and creations. And these are like norms and rituals and art and a shared language and symbols that can help reinforce the values of the overall organizational culture. That makes some sense? Okay, so as we're putting in a new operating system, we're essentially changing the organizational culture. And I wanted to break this down a little bit because I want to show you a really quick video of, this is from the news that's talking about New Day, which is an anti-human trafficking program that we ran at the Salvation Army. And this was the first program that we put into place that we didn't have to kind of retrofit the values of sanctuary. This one we created from the ground up as a trauma-informed program. So I'm going to stop the share for a sec. I'm going to play a video. Okay. Give me just one sec. You know what? I think I need to do something to enhance the sound that I never remember to do. Share screen. Here we go. Okay, sorry about that. Make it big.
Sex trafficking is a serious issue here in Philadelphia, and this morning we are taking a look at how one local organization is helping the victims.
Here's Action News' Jeanette Reyes with this week's Philly Proud.
Sex trafficking is a worldwide problem. Pennsylvania is one of 10 states with the highest number of reported cases of sex trafficking in the country. The Salvation Army leads a national anti-trafficking program. On the local front, they manage the New Day Center, a place focused on helping women victims in Kensington.
The drop-in center is a safe and welcoming environment for women who are 18 and older in commercial sexual exploitation.
The New Day Center offers a variety of services.
Food, clothing, toiletries. We have a shower, a washer and dryer. So if someone is interested in getting housing or needs detox or needs an ID, we will support them in their goals. We also offer a self group, which is a trauma-informed sanctuary model group to talk through safety, emotions, loss, and future. And then at the end of the day, we do offer an art therapy group. A lot of the women who walk through our doors have experienced extreme violence, as well as are struggling with substance use disorder, are struggling with homelessness, food insecurity, lack of medical support.
Estelina Fernandez comes to the center daily. After serving 11 years in prison for selling drugs and experiencing homelessness, she's looking for help to change her life.
Starting to go to different organizations and trying to get help, and people have been, helping me out. I'm trying my best to get back into school because I want my GED so bad.
Estelina is not shy about her ultimate goal.
I want to be a homeless advocate. I want to open up my own place.
The Salvation Anti-Trafficking Program also includes a transitional home, and the New Day Center oversees the City of Philadelphia's human trafficking hotline.
We've had close to 700 individual women walk through the doors of New Day this year.
And it's their open door policy that resonates.
The resource and the love, and they don't look down on you whatsoever.
So glad you stayed with us.
Okay, I'm gonna get the slides again. Okay, so that was New Day, and I like that little clip because it really shows you all the components of what a trauma-informed program can be. So if we take a look at, remember Cheryl's target there, the basic assumptions as was described in that little video, right, is that New Day provides consistent, safe, warming, welcoming, and trauma-informed environment for women exploited by the commercial sex industry. New Day believes that women are the experts of their own story and aims to create a space where they can work towards reclaiming control of their lives. The other basic assumptions in this program, of course, are the faith-based values of the Salvation Army. They take on a modified harm reduction. They're very clear about providing trauma-informed care, creating a warm, welcoming, and safe space. And really the bulk of the work is based upon the transformative power of relationships. So those are the basic assumptions as we look at New Day as a program. Now, if we remember that inner circle from Cheryl's example is taking a look at the values that kind of hold things together, that describe how things ought to be. So in this program, they use the values of sanctuary. I'm going to look at SAMHSA's a little bit later, but they use the values of sanctuary. And this is their original space where they actually painted them on the wall. So to help kind of remind everybody about what this space is really about and what those shared commitments and values are. First and foremost, they value nonviolence. It's a space where you cannot be violent, you have to leave. We know that violence really can be very triggering for people. Violence can beget even more violence. So we want really, in order to kind of stop the spread of that, there's got to be a zero tolerance for violence. And that's on behalf of staff and participants and anybody that comes into the program. They share a commitment to emotional intelligence. Part of doing sanctuary and doing a trauma-informed program is really understanding the impact of trauma on people's lives, on people's emotional lives, and understanding that people have a hard time regulating their emotions when they've gone through such difficult times, and that we understand that things are not personal, that things can be said, but it really isn't personal. It's coming from a place of trauma, and that we really do understand that. We understand the nature of change and what it takes for people to make positive changes in their lives. We value social learning. It's an environment where we learn from one another so that women learn from each other participants. There's a lot of volunteers that come into the space, and just being there to talk with the women like you would talk with anyone else, and that we kind of learn how to be different, how to manage our anger a little bit, what life could possibly look like. And we learn from modeling and from one another. We value open communication, and this is the just basic transparency, that there really are no secrets about the rules and about how things are run, that we are really open and transparent about that. New Day gives out a free outfit to anybody who comes in, but you can only get one because they don't have enough. So rather than telling the women, oh, you're only allowed to have one, they engage in a conversation about, we won't have enough to give everybody else if I give you more than one outfit today, and how that they can make their donations last, so that other women start to learn the rules and then they can explain to others. So we really are open about why we do what we do and how things are done. Social responsibility is a huge one, in that we are all responsible for the safety of the community. That means the way we interact with each other, with our program participants, that if we see something, we say something, and that we really are about maintaining a safe space, so that if someone is engaged in some sort of activity that's not safe, that it's not like snitching to come and tell us about it. It's about maintaining safety for all. Democracy in terms of decision making, that we really try to create a democratic environment. If you think of the work that we do with disenfranchised people, they have no say. They've never been given a say in their lives. So to start to engage people in taking responsibility for their space and having a say in how we do things. So the women have a say in what kind of snacks and things that are ordered for the space. They include them in kind of figuring out what kinds of support groups that they would like to have, some of the hours of the space, how the services are done in the space, so that everybody has a say. And when we work from this sort of lens, remember, we're flattening the hierarchy so that we all have our roles, but nobody is any more important than anybody else. So that we're all on the same page, because we wouldn't have work if we didn't have program participants. So we're all really important in how we do this. And lastly, we absolutely have to value growth and change. And we know that change is a very long process, but we know that it will happen, so that we're always focused on our own personal growth, on our own ability to provide better services. And there's always this kind of continuing process of evaluating how we're doing and what can we do to do it better. Questions about that? Okay, so that outer circle in Cheryl's target talked about this notion of artifacts and creation. So this is what also helps to kind of cement the trauma-informed values that we had been kind of holding up and teaching those that we're serving. I think you can see from the pictures and then some from the video that was shown, is they really use a lot of arts to help with healing. The women create vision boards. The women's art is spread throughout the site, so that women really have a sense of ownership. And then over on this side is a wall. They didn't talk too much. They showed it in the video. Where over the handprints, it said these hands have. So all the women and volunteers and staff that come through there, if they wish, can put their hand on the wall, which says, like, I've been here. And if you think about what women deal with, living on the Ave and managing addictions and managing this commercial sexual exploitation, to sort of assert who you are, or even who you want to be and what you've done and what you plan to be, is a very, very powerful thing. And it's kind of a sacred space there, because there are some of the women who have not really kind of survived over time, or some have really moved on. You can see the steps that they've taken. These hands have been clean for 6 months, things like that. It's just sort of wonderful and inspiring. But it does sort of shape the space to say, this is our space and we are part of this. The last part of kind of these artifacts and creations is what's known as self. Now in the sanctuary, when you teach sanctuary, the glue that holds it all together is this psychoeducational program that's called SELF, that stands for safety, emotions, loss, and future. And this encompasses such a beautiful way of understanding the impact of trauma when there's been violence and horrific things that have happened to people in such simple language and in such a relevant way that people can start to understand what's happened to them and can start to learn what they need to do to heal. So everyone goes through self, all the staff, everybody in every part of the organization, upper management, and even in the Red Shield, all the kitchen staff, all the housekeeping, all the maintenance, all the front desk folks. I mean, it was a challenge to be able to get all of the training in when we're running a 24/7 operation, but it's doable. But here, everybody learns this. And at New Day, they have ongoing self trainings, and that's for interns and anybody who comes. But what it does, and it's usually done over the course of like 4 to 6 weeks, you start to talk about safety, right? So we know safety is imperative when we're running a trauma-informed organization. And women can start to identify different kinds of safety. And when we talk about safety, we start to talk about boundary management. And what comes from this psychoeducational program becomes the shared language. So for an example, when we talk about boundaries, we say yes when we mean it, we say no when we don't. And there's always that kind of uh-oh feeling, right? Like maybe you've agreed to do something and maybe you shouldn't have agreed to do something, or it's violated some boundary. So when participants communicate with their case managers or with other program staff, they can say like, yo, Amy was really an uh-oh for me today. And people know what that means, right? So shared language is really important in how we cement these commitments. So we talk about all different kinds of safety, what people need to be safe, how they've maintained their safety. And we look at 4 different kinds of safety. We look at, are we safe with ourselves? Are we safe in groups? Are we safe morally? And then right now I forgot the 4th one, but I will come back to it. But we look at safety in a very comprehensive way. From safety, we move on to, we look at emotions. I think I had mentioned earlier that people's emotions can really run amok when they've experienced such trauma. So we talk a lot about how you control the volume. So there we talk about volume control, so that other people can kind of understand this shared language of whether or not I'm being able to manage my emotions today. Sometimes you have to scream to get your needs met, but it's not all the time. So how do you start to bring that down so that you can actually get your needs met and can understand why some days you feel this rage and other times you feel completely numb. So when we talk about emotions, we talk about the whole range of emotions and what happens to emotions when there's been this kind of trauma. And then we move on to loss, and we talk about loss for a couple weeks because there have been so many kinds of losses, and not just, I lost my house, or, I lost a connection to my family, but a lot of the folks that we serve have lost all of these just basic milestones because of all the things that happened to them. They weren't able to graduate from high school. There was no prom. Maybe there was nobody around when they gave birth to their first child. Maybe they weren't even allowed to keep their child when their child was born. But there's so many losses. And until we start to mourn those, we really can't look forward to a future. And I think another area of loss is that sometimes there are these fantasies that somebody's going to come in and rescue me from all of this. And that's just not real. That just doesn't happen. And in order to make those changes, we have to kind of find a way to dig deep and do that work ourselves, of course, with support. But I think recognizing and grieving our losses can then open the door for us to start to look at future and what future could possibly be. I mean, if we think about it, families living in emergency housing, or even these women that we're serving on the Avenue, really have no sense of future, not like the 6-month kind of future, right? Many of us, if we've gone to college, we could see the 4 years, start as a freshman, I finish as a senior. You don't have that kind of vision. They're robbed of all of that, I think, by the trauma, by having to figure out where you're going to rest your head the next day, where your next meal is going to come from. You really can't think that far ahead. So it takes a while to help to build up this sense of future with those that we work with. And I honestly think that trauma just robs people of their imagination. They lose their ability just to imagine what any kinds of possibilities of future could be. And I think through healing, that comes into place. So the language of self becomes the language of sanctuary that everyone shares, so that there's a very strong mutual understanding. Questions? Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, I just wanted to kind of compare the values of sanctuary and SAMHSA. They are really very similar in lots of ways. And SAMHSA has a lovely layout for how to do trauma-informed care in organizations. And I think this had come from that. But primarily, SAMHSA looks and understand the values of trauma-informed care would be safety compared to nonviolence and sanctuary, trustworthiness and transparency. We mean what we say we're going to do, and we're really open. There are no hidden secrets, and that relates to open communication. SAMHSA has a strong value for peer support, which I think ties in with social learning. The New Day has come up with a survivor board that is also building more kinds of peer support. And I think in New Day, there are women who have been attending the space a lot longer that really do provide support to others. Collaboration and mutuality. We all work on this together. It's interesting when you talk to people who come from trauma-informed organizations, you hear a lot more we's, like this is what we do, than I's. It's very clear that it's a group effort, that we're all in this together. SAMHSA values empowerment and choice. Sanctuary, it's democracy and growth and change. And then SAMHSA is focusing a bit on cultural, historical, and gender issues, which can all be addressed through open communication, social responsibility, and democracy. So I was going to move on to look at how we use our trauma-informed values from hiring to termination. Before I move into that, are there any questions about kind of sanctuary and the organizational culture or anything related to that? You could speak right up.
Susan, one question comes to mind is, as you're embarking on this, do you run into individuals who are really struggling moving beyond their own past, and so not willing to take the path of moving towards a trauma-informed organization?
Are you specifying participant or staff?
Yes.
Yes. I think the beauty of starting this in an emergency housing program is that there's a turnover of the population. And I have to tell you that made it easier as we started to sort of retrofit that in there, because as new folks came, they just thought this is the way we did things. So they never saw anything differently. What I found with staff is that those who could really embrace these values found a lot of satisfaction in doing that. And then some folks who didn't just sort of fell by the wayside because they weren't willing to participate in things like our community meetings, or were not able to maintain those values. And over time, they just felt that it was not the place for them any longer. I mean, we know that some people end up in social services because it gives them some sense of power and control. And what we decided here was that we don't have that power and control, that we create policies that at the very base of them really are about safety and are about helping people to move forward in their lives. So if we can't abide by those, then we can't be part of the program. So starting out right from the beginning.
One other question.
Oh yeah.
There was a question in the chat. Sam asked, for those of us who want to get involved with New Day, such as volunteering or working within the Salvation Army programs, will there be time to chat about that at the end?
Sure, I am happy to do that, and I can connect you. Absolutely. They have a strong volunteer base that just makes a world of difference in that program. And being part of that is absolutely life altering. It's just amazing. So I would love to talk to people about that at the end. Anybody else? Okay. So let's work our way from hiring through termination, starting right at the beginning when we have positions available. We want to start with a phone screening. We all know that social services don't really pay a whole lot of money, so we don't want to waste anybody's time bringing somebody in for an interview saying, you pay what? and kind of setting things up in a difficult way. And I think you set a tone when you start with a phone screening and you ask people what interests them about working with you, and you're very transparent about, this is what the position pays. Are you still interested? Do you still want to come in and meet with us? I support a team interview process. Whatever team is going to be working with a new staff person, they are the ones that really need to be making the decision. They know what they know best what the work requires, and they know how they function as a team and what they need as a new team member. So for example, if I was hiring a case manager in the emergency housing program, I would work with them to conduct the interviews. The team would come up with the questions. It's really important, and I learned this over time, to have very standardized interview questions, so you're asking everybody the same thing. I know sometimes you can get off on tangents and you don't quite get all the same information. So when you're comparing applicants, you're not really comparing apples to apples. So we want to make sure we have these standardized interview questions coming from the team who will be embracing this new hire. If possible, I really think including participants in this process is key. They also know what they need from a staff person, and they can get a good sense of who could support them and who might not support them. And I always have to look at a potential hire who comes in and doesn't wish to be interviewed by participants, because it really tells me a lot about their values, because we're here to sort of meet and join people as they are and help them to move on. We're no better than anybody else. And then hiring is pretty much done by consensus of the team. So it's a team decision. If you can possibly do this, I think it makes a big difference. We want to start people off right with a very structured orientation. We want them to be able to kind of understand completely what's expected of them. Organizations have a lot of working parts. Emergency housing has so many little rules and expectations from kitchen and how we keep things clean and what hours we can do certain things. So we want to start people off the best way possible. This is when we introduce people to the model. So right away in the beginning, we would have new staff participating in a self group. And that can be new staff along with any new family that had come into the emergency housing program. Again, you're really modeling that you are flattening the hierarchy. And we've all experienced some sort of trauma, for all of us. I mean, most of us, I'm sure, are Philadelphians. You can't sort of live in a city and not have experienced some sort of trauma. It's expected to have a training plan. People need to know what's expected of them when they start a new job, kind of understanding what those competencies should be. We need to kind of help people understand the process and the content of the job. So here, when I mean process, I mean, these are our trauma-informed values. These are how we do things. Content could be, how you fill out a housing application, how you do progress notes in our organization, how, we manage client files or any of those kinds of things. And right off the bat, we do some safety planning. So when we all feel triggered, that we have a plan in place just like every one of our participants, in what it is that we need to do to take care of ourselves, whether that is, to breathe. For some, it's just to maybe go for a walk or listen to some music. But we need to know, it's sort of like a fire drill. We don't wait until something terrible happens before we teach people how to get out of the building, right? So the same thing with safety planning. When we work with very traumatized people and marginalized folks who've been struggling for a long time, we too need to maintain our own safety plans. Kind of nice to introduce people right off the bat to their coworkers. Sometimes new staff are sort of thrown to the lions. I've lived through that myself, like, here, you're hired, go do. And it's not really a very good way to engage people and to pull them in right from the start. So we want to introduce everyone to our new participants in these kinds of programs. There's often a ritual for doing that. We would often do something special in a new community meeting to introduce new families, new staff. So it becomes part of our process. Assigning a buddy to a new coworker sort of sounds a little third gradish. I do realize that, but it really makes a difference so somebody has someone to go to when they have any questions about anything, because when you're new, it can be a little disorienting. I think it's imperative that for those of us running programs that we use that 90-day orientation period. You have a training plan, you have an orientation plan, that we can expect people to really give us their best in 90 days. And our job is really to serve clients. We're not there necessarily to serve just to be a place that hires people and gives people jobs. We expect people to work really effectively with those that we serve. So I always have used the 90-day orientation period to see if someone's really going to be a good match. Because if they can't give you their best and they can't show up on time for work for the first 90 days, I don't know what we expect on the 91st day. So to be able to use that time period and a 90-day evaluation, these are the things that you're doing really well on. We wish to keep you, and moving on from there. So if your organization could allow you to do that, I have made the decision many, many times not to keep someone after 90 days. When we interview people, sometimes you wonder who they are when they've come to work, because they're certainly not the person that you've interviewed. It's been very, very interesting. So in terms of kind of personnel management, overall management, trauma-informed organizations, we place a priority on teaching and coaching our staff in how to bring their best self to work. Now, when in the Salvation Army, we are all different kinds of positions. I think I had mentioned earlier that we have cooks and cleaners and case managers and front desk kind of reception folks and people to be with our kids. So all different levels of skill and background. And we need to be really mindful of that so that when we have new staff, we can sort of teach them to be a little self-soothing. Staff really need to be able to take good care of themselves. Self-trust. I mean, we've all sat down to do a new job and think, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this, when I really do know how to do this. So we teach people to really trust in themselves, showing self-compassion, showing self-regulation. Some of our folks come from backgrounds or from other employment sites where it's okay to scream and yell at one another, but it's not in these kinds of organizations. So we teach people how to better regulate their emotions, how to set healthy limits. I know in an emergency housing program that our participants would want all of our case managers' time all the time. And not everything requires that level of intensity. So we need to be able to effectively set limits so that we can get our jobs done. And how do we do that in a kind, supportive way? Because I don't even think it's helpful that we provide assistance every single time, that we have to let people have an opportunity to figure some things out for themselves. helping staff to really communicate what their own needs are, what it is they might need on their job, where they're struggling, and to be able to feel comfortable in sharing that and not feel that they're going to get in trouble because they do that. And also to have an accurate perception of others. I've hired some younger folks who, when they get some feedback from a supervisor, immediately assume that they hate them. And it's not about that at all. It's about the work, and it's about it. So you're sort of misperceiving your supervisor when they're only trying to give you some support to teach you how to do your job better. So we really find ways to kind of coach and help our staff to be their best selves so they can bring that to those that they work with. So I think you can sort of see now how this parallel process works. We support the staff in a way that they can then be supportive of those they served. So trauma-informed leadership looks very different than what you would think of in a normal hierarchical structure. Leadership is really all about supporting the staff. How can I support you? How can I help you to be your very best self on this job? What is it that you might need to do that? I mean, people work at all different rates. I had one case manager, she would do her progress notes right after she had a session, never got behind on her notes. Other people take a little bit longer to be able to write their notes, so perhaps they need a Friday afternoon to do that. So we have to find ways that we can individually support people to get the job done. Trauma-informed leadership is solution focused. When we hear about issues and problems that are happening, that we need to then focus on how do we make this better? We don't sort of wallow in the fact that, oh yeah, this is terrible. How do we make this better? The leaders are the keeper of the model, which means that we're always kind of reminding people of what our values are, always keeping, doing some training, reiterating to staff about how important maintaining these values really are and what they mean to us. Corrector of dysfunctional processes. Things sometimes go awry, or we're expected to do some things that are sort of silly. At the Red Shield, there was, I don't know if they still do this, but the Archdiocese lovingly paid for all the milk for all the kids. But what we had to do was put a milk container in front of each child. And sometimes the kids would throw them around, sometimes they didn't want milk, but regardless, we had to have it there because if someone from the Archdiocese came in, we would get cited, and over time, we could possibly lose the ability to get the free milk for the kids. So when that process like that starts to go awry, or people start to think, oh, I don't really have to do that, it's up to leadership to make sure that that continues on. Also creating space for resolution, because conflicts are going to happen. And one of the biggest parts of I think, helping people who have survived such horrific trauma is teaching people how to resolve things in a peaceful way. Because you have all of these ideas in your head of kind of like where I fit in the world and who I am and what's happened to me. But to be able to give someone a voice and allow them to talk something through, just I think can live on for a long, long time. Leadership is future focused for all. We're always sort of moving forward, evaluating how we're doing, what needs to be tweaked, what's going really well, what can we add, and by all means supports self-care. Have to allow staff to take time off. Sometimes staff need to be encouraged to take time off, to be able to take care of themselves. I was fortunate at the Salvation Army, very generous vacation policy. And then, some staff saying, oh, I'm not going to take any of my time. Well, you have to take time. You have to take time to take care of yourself. In terms of like clinical supervision for direct care staff, it's the goal here, of course, is to create a culture of safety and trust. So when we engage with those that we supervise, we're working that parallel process again to show care and support, because when people are well cared for, they're more likely to care for others. Teaching people how to support healthy boundaries. I never loved the staff that had to stay late at night to get things done and would stay night after a long day. That just made no sense to me. Those are not really healthy boundaries, and that people to do this really hard work with people, we have to have very healthy lives outside of work. And we have to have interests and things that sort of fill us up outside of work to create a healthy balance. In supervision, we can really model what transparency looks like, and that we are not keeping secrets. We tell people exactly, like through honest communication about how they're doing, what other kinds of services, what other kind of supports they might need, so that they can also share those ideas with those that they serve. It's a good place to start practicing reflective listening. We'd like to assume that all of our graduates are able to respond in a reflective way, but maybe they're not, so they can learn that from us. We've been implementing motivational interviewing. So this is the place in supervision where we start to use some of that language of motivational interviewing with our staff, because then they can learn that language in a way that they can use with those they're serving. Strength-based attitudes and language. We have to be the one to kind of maintain this sense of focusing on strengths. There are always participants who will maybe disappoint you by picking up again or doing something that prohibits them from getting housing, but always finding ways to reframe that as a strength. And that helps everyone sort of maintain this strength-based attitude towards those we're serving, and remembering that people are always giving us the best that they can. Important in organizations are tools to manage conflict, right? Because that's where things can go awry, and if we don't keep things in check, that's when problems start to happen. So we focus on safety first. Remember, there's always that language of safety that holds this together, and no tolerance for violence, none at all. Even for staff, it's not a sort of a 3-strike thing. You just can't break out in any kind of violence in a program. This requires that we have really clearly defined policies, and policies that everybody is aware of, so that if someone violates one of their policies and they lose their job, it's not because Susan said so, it's because I violated the policy. So the policies run the program, we follow the policies and our roles in the organization. Always, we need to create opportunities for resolution. And I will say that 1,000 times. I'm going to say it 3 more times actually in the next point here, is that there's always resolving, because people are always learning when they have a chance to resolve. When we've worked through problems, when certain participants feel that staff don't like them for some reason, we bring it together and we develop those skills to resolve. And there's often just amazing growth that comes from that. But it's a huge transferable skill that people can use when they leave us. We use progressive discipline, highlighting what the right thing to do is. And I'm going to talk about that in a sec. And then endings can be framed in a positive way. Not everybody is successful in one of these environments. There are always deal breakers that people perhaps are still engaged in other behaviors, and they can't function in our program. It doesn't make them bad, it's just not their time. And when we look at it that way, that we can wish people well, we can welcome them back another time if they wish to try again after a period of time. But even for staff, I think it's really important that when staff are sinking and they're not doing a good job, sometimes we get really frustrated with them. Perhaps it's just not for them. And having open, honest communications about, maybe this job is grown in a way that you can't do this, can be such a relief for people and a relief for a program, because people who are unhappy and sometimes people that can be toxic with others can be so destructive in a social service program and can really undermine all the good work that you're doing. So we really want to make sure that the people that we have working with us really can do the kind of job that we're expecting. So even when we have to take progressive discipline when things go a little wrong, we can do it from a strength-based way. Years and years ago, when I first started supervising, I forget, it was something that a particular staff had done that I just thought was rather egregious, pulled her in the office to talk about it. And she's like, how do I know I've done wrong if you haven't told me that this is what you expect? And it was a really good life lesson for me. So that we really need to let people know what's right. We need to let them know what's expected of them on their jobs and how they need to do things. So that's the step one when we start to take progressive discipline, is to teach people what's right. Strength-based assessment followed by a description of the policy and an action plan, so that we're really reinforcing our programs are run based upon these very clear policies that we all follow. And then a good action plan to help people kind of set up what it is they need to do to make a difference. Because every time you have to take progressive discipline doesn't mean that someone's ready to leave you. It could mean they had a really, really awful day, or they misunderstood what one of the expectations was, or something rubbed them the wrong way. But here's how you can get back up and on track. And then we need to follow up and review. We can really reward people for making positive changes, or sometimes we find that we really are not a good match, and we can sort of end in a positive way. And kind of holding it all together, there are tools, and kind of throughout the presentation, there are those little toolboxes that I put in there that are some basic tools from the sanctuary model. One is community meetings. So when there aren't 100 of us, I generally open this up is in a community meeting or a community check-in, where we just say, kind of go around, say our name, how we're feeling, a goal for the day, and who you can ask for help. So we would have these meetings with staff every Monday morning, and then we would do 2 community meetings with the larger population, kids and everybody coming in, and noisy and chaotic, but it allowed each of our residents who had come from all different parts of the city to say, I am a member of this community. My name is Susan, and today I'm, feeling whatever. But it allowed people to really assert who they are and be part of the community. And community meetings allow us to have democratic processes. So there was a time, one summer we had, families probably had there were about 25 teenagers in the program over the summer, which made us all very anxious when you think about 25 teens and what we think teens could possibly get into. But they approached the community meeting, and since it was summertime, they didn't want to have to go to bed early. They wanted to be able to stay up at night. They didn't have to get up for school. We had summer programming. It didn't start till a little later in the morning. And they asked if they could hang out in their teen lounge till midnight. Now, this violated kind of all of our policies, because we had kids going to bed a little bit earlier so they could get enough sleep for school. But it allowed the entire community to have a conversation about what the developmental needs of these kids are. And they do need to be spending a little bit more time on their own and not underneath their moms and dads constantly. So the parents agreed that they would take turns checking on the lounge every half an hour. And the kids were successful, that they could watch TV together with their friends and be safe until midnight, and then the lounge shut down. So I think community meetings can also restore the sense of democracy and allow people to take some control of what happens in their lives in an institution. And I think that can be rare. Team meetings with staff, 5 heads are always better than 1. That problem solving is done in that way, that we make decisions by consensus based upon our roles. Safety plans. Everybody has a safety plan. I mentioned those earlier. Critical incidents are when we can sort of stop and take a look when something has happened, and allows us just to be able to process, similar to red flag reviews, which can be when something happens to anybody in the program, that they can call a red flag review. Everybody stops what they're doing, and we come and talk about it. I used to work Sundays through Thursdays when my son was very little, and I was in my office doing some paperwork on a Sunday afternoon, and somebody brings me a trash can that's smoking, because somebody must have put a match or something and there's this smoke, and they wanted me to see, like, look, this is burning trash can. So we put the fire out, but I did call a red flag review so that we could process through how dangerous this really could be. And nobody ever has to bring me something burning for me to believe whether or not it was burning. And we had a chance to talk about how we store our matches and lighters and how we are able to keep each other safe. So these are just some basic tools that help ensure that we can continue to provide a safe level of care and maintain these overall values. And finally, sort of the impact is certainly improved outcomes. The city used to count how many times we had an ambulance or a police car come to the emergency housing program. Apparently they got the bills and they weren't very happy about that. So they used to check that. And after we had really brought this model on, in about 3 months, we went from calling 911 probably about 4 or 5 times a month to only calling, and that was to address a violent outburst within the program. It went all the way down to like maybe 1 call a month, and that was when somebody was going into labor. So that was huge. It helps to check the spread of violence, because people have opportunities to talk through things before things happen. When we have this open communication, that each shift would then communicate what happened prior, so that when, if there's some bad feelings, they're sort of bubbling up earlier in the day, it's always addressed before there's a shift change. The coolest thing about this, I think, are the opportunities for creativity, in that when things run really peacefully and smoothly, and all people feel that their needs are being met, then you can see these bursts of creativity. I had a case manager who wanted to do yoga with the kids, so we secured some funding. We're able to send her off. She did a yoga group. There was another case manager who enjoyed gardening. We started a garden in the back of the program with the kids, so they got to grow vegetables and stuff that they would then bring to the kitchen and feel that they were really contributing. We had musicians come in and work with the kids. So it's just it's these amazing bursts of creativity and how we do things when there's just peace and people are being able to take care of themselves. Improved ability to manage organizational hardships. When we have a really good understanding and we have ways of communicating with one another, when bad things happen, we can cope better. We manage through having to make some adjustments due to a decrease in funding. We once lost a staff member who passed away in the building, and we were able to organize ourselves and our community around coping with that in a way that I don't think we could have done if we hadn't been working under this model. And quite frankly, I mean, just everybody can win. So that's all about trauma-informed organizations. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I would love to hear any thoughts that you might have. I'm gonna stop this, well, I'll leave that up for a minute in case anybody wants to get my information. So are there any thoughts? Has anyone else worked under Sanctuary and they'd like to share?
Susan, I want to thank you so much for coming and giving that lovely talk. Adrian asked if it would be possible to have the slides after this presentation.
Yeah, Amy, I can probably send you a PDF of the slides.
Thank you. And then somebody asked if you could post the link to that YouTube video in the chat.
It's not on YouTube. See, that was the struggle with this. It's from the local news, and I think the keywords that I put in was New Day anti-trafficking, and that's what came up from like 6 ABC. But I was not able to find that on YouTube. I wish I could, because then I would feel better that it would be up there and easier to access, actually. Any other questions? Something else in the chat, let's see. Oh, Amy, you found that, thank you.
Yep, thanks, you're welcome. Just needed the keywords. Does anybody work in an organization, or have they worked in an organization in the past where they saw some challenges and could see applying the trauma-informed constructs that Susan has talked about, applying some of the aspects of sanctuary and so we have a participant that's talking about how they work in a residential mental health program, or they worked in a residential mental health program where there was a very high staff turnover. And could you speak to why that happens and how a facility could move to trauma-informed thinking to reduce staff turnover?
Yeah, I think when people don't feel supported and they give their all, I think they finally kind of hit a wall and feel that they can't continue on in a certain organization. I have found that under Sanctuary that we really have been able to maintain really good staff. Another part of, in the way that I always looked at this, is that when we commit to growth and change, then it's not just for those that we serve, it's for all of the staff. So a lot of our front desk folks had pretty much, they were required to have a high school diploma. We didn't require that much experience, that we would train on the job, but I always had their supervisor talking with them about what their next goals, what were their goals. Would they like to perhaps get a BSW, return to go to college, so that everybody has this feeling that they're moving forward. And I think that's what's key, is that it's so hard to keep giving and giving and giving if nothing is sort of given to you. And when everybody is working on things, it's just makes for this amazing culture, so that some of the front desk staff would be going to community college, as for some of the residents, and then they could sort of share in that experience. So I think that's how that can make a difference. It's sad when there's such a high turnover, and it so much impacts those that we serve, that it's just imperative to me that we find ways to keep staff.
Absolutely. Another participant asked, what resources would you recommend for organizations to get more informed or educated?
I would look at SAMHSA. You can just go online and SAMHSA trauma-informed organizations. And then Sandy Bloom has written several books. One that explains, I think it's even here, is Restoring Sanctuary is a really helpful one. This is where she really uses the language of an operating system and how we operate. And it does explain the trauma-informed language. But I think what we did when we were struggling was we just didn't know what was happening, and we did a big search, and that led us to Sandy. There are some other models around, but I do know that SAMHSA gives you a step-by-step guidebook. And I think what we did was we took all of the aspects of this program and sort of tailored them to ourselves. And I think that's what you would need to do, is sort of tailor that to your population and kind of the character of your program.
Thanks, Susan. I completely agree. And another guide that's really a wonderful resource is Trauma-Informed Oregon, which actually walks organizations through a 4-step process and actually gives strategic operational strategies, I guess, for how to move from being trauma aware to trauma informed, and different steps along the way that an organization can take, from the individual provider educational experience all the way through policy and procedure. So that might be a good reference for folks as well.
There are a couple of good trauma-informed checklists too. There's one that I've used, and I'm sorry, I can't think of it at the moment. But Amy, I can look for it and maybe send it to you if anybody would like that. But it's a nice starting point to kind of see how people are practicing within your organization. But I just can't think of a time when everybody needs support, particularly coming back now with the pandemic, as there's discussions of maybe not wearing masks come January, or what any of that really might look like for people. And it's tough.
Yeah, yeah. Also for participants to know that on February 18th, we're having a group of leaders from the New Kensington Community Development Project come to speak about implementation of community-informed trauma principles, and be speaking exactly what Susan was talking about, that for every organization or every community, there's a significant need to do an assessment and individualize the operational strategies to the community or to the organization. So that might be something that folks want to be on the lookout for.
Okay. So there was, I think, a Samantha who had asked about New Day. Sam, if you can see my email address, you can just email me and I will help connect you to the right folks.
I will. Thank you.
Good, good.
Susan, another Susan asked, do you need a primary care person at your organization? We know some nurse practitioners. She's offering you some.
I think that they would. I'm not there now. I've kind of moved on to do some other things. I would also connect you because I think they really could. And I know they've looked at that over the past, particularly to help out with some wound care and things like that. So yeah, so please, if you follow up with my email, I will connect you to all of the right folks.
And Susan, Jean says, thanks for this information. Very helpful. Thank you for this information. Very helpful. My favorite piece is that you collected outcome data.
Yep. As we have to. I mean, the thing about data is that if we don't collect that, we don't really know what the impact is. So we did find some ways to make sure we were tracking what was happening with people. We were tracking also how long it took to secure housing, how long it took to get housing applications in, and getting people through our system.
I'm putting in the chat other ways to measure trauma informed at an organizational level or an individual level. There's the ARTIC and there's the TICS-10. Those are two scales that could be used to measure effectiveness for others interested in measuring. Any other questions or comments for Susan? All right. Well, Susan, I want to thank you all very much thank you for coming and sharing with us your vast experience and expertise in this, and your clear passion for supporting everybody in the organizations to thrive. And thank everybody who attended today, a Friday afternoon, nearing the end of November. It's a tough time. So thank you all for coming and offering your time.
And thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.